Two project for Criminal Justice 101, and my name is Chase Warren. The criminal court process begins in Texas with the arrest, the booking, the initial appearance, the preliminary hearing, the arraignment, the pretrial hearings, the trial, sentencings, and the appeal. Arrests usually start with the officer identifying themselves and informing the individual that they are under arrest and what they are under arrest for, if they're required. The individual is restrained with handcuffs or another form of restraint to prevent escape. A search of the individual may be conducted for weapons, evidence, or other items related to the crime, and the individual is taken to the police station or jail for booking. Booking is the second step, and it usually will begin with personal info being collected, such as the name, the address, the date of birth, etc. A photograph is then taken of the individual, which is called a mugshot, and they also take the fingerprint of the individual and is entered into a database for identification later on. A basic health check may also be conducted just for the well-being of the individual before they are sentenced and put into the jail. Bail can also be posted, and an individual can post bail for release. If the individual cannot post bail, they will be assigned to a holding cell until their court appearance. Excuse me. After booking, the judge formally informs the individual of the charges against them, and the defendant is informed of their legal rights, the right to remain silent, legal representation, and right to a preliminary hearing. Judge reviews bail conditions and will set an amount depending on the conditions of the crime. If the defendant does not have an attorney, the court will appoint a public defender. The court will then schedule future meetings such as arraignment and when the defendant will enter a plea. Based on the bail decision, individual may be released or held in court until their next appearance. The preliminary hearing is only available when there's a felony charge at hand, and its main purpose is for determining why a crime was committed. The prosecution presents evidence, and witnesses the defense may also present evidence or challenge the prosecution. The judge determines if the evidence presented supports reasonable belief that a crime was committed, and if the judge finds probable cause that a case is bound to a grand jury. If not, the charges are dismissed. The arraignment is when the defendant is read the charges again to be sure they are understood. The defendant will enter a plea of guilty, not guilty, or no contest. A public defender will be appointed if defendant does not have a lawyer. The bail will be reviewed and appointed depending on the severity of the crime. Future meetings and scheduling will occur. The pretrial hearings usually consist of the prosecution or defense files a motion requesting the court to make legal ruling or to take specific actions such as suppress evidence or dismiss charges. Both parties present arguments. The party that filed the motion will explain why their request should be granted. Both sides will submit evidence relevant to the motion. The judge will consider arguments, and the judge will issue a ruling on the motion, determining if certain evidence can be used and if the case will be dismissed. The outcome of the motion can impact the case by excluding evidence, changing the scope of the case, and affecting specific procedures. Last but certainly not least is the trial. A jury is selected after potential jurors are questioned for service. Both prosecution and defense will give their opening statements which outline their cases and their points to prove. Each side has the opportunity to cross-examine each other to challenge their credibility. After all evidence is presented, both sides summarize their arguments with their closing statements. The jury deliberates in private to decide the verdict. The jury announces the verdict guilty, not guilty, or a hung jury where no consensus is reached. If the verdict is guilty, an individual will be sentenced to the time appropriate to their crime. Sometimes sentencing is a separate step. Potential consequences of Lieutenant Thompson's behavior. Lieutenant Thompson faces serious felony charges of battery and misconduct in public office. A felony conviction will cost him the loss of some civil rights such as the right to vote, possess firearms, and certain employment. Lieutenant Thompson will likely be terminated from his position with the police department. Even if he is not convicted of the charges due to the incident, he will likely be terminated or suspended. He could potentially lose retirement benefits as well as his certifications to be a police officer. Scott Simpson could also file a civil lawsuit against Lieutenant Thompson and the department for excessive use of force. The police department could also have its image tarnished and its budget may be affected due to costly settlements and judgments. My response to Lieutenant Thompson's use of force would be, I have a legal duty to prevent any further excessive use of force, so I would pull Lieutenant Thompson to the side and verbally address him or if I have to physically get him off of the individual, I would then ensure that Scott is okay and get him appropriate medical aid. I would then report the evidence to our superior through a proper phone call or face-to-face conversation since an officer has violated code. I would then check my body cameras for the evidence. Checking my body cameras for the evidence would be my next step since that is the main source of evidence. I would present this evidence to the investigation team and provide my truthful statements to what I had seen. Thank you.